Hi everyone, welcome back to Way to Programming. I'm Parul, and today we're diving into a topic that every developer and actually every programmer and anyone who is learning about programming grapples with that is like when they are coding, they have to decide when to soft code and when to hard code, right? And these choices can significantly impact your projects, right? And I have created a video on soft coding and hard coding. If you want, you can have a look. I'll put the link in the description box below this video for that specific video. But before we jump in uh, and talk about, when to use soft coding, when to use hard coding, let's first clarify the difference between soft coding and hard coding. And you can always go back to that video for extra clarification, but I'm just trying to give you a very simple illustration. So let's first start with soft coding. Soft coding is a way of writing code to allow easy modification and adaptability without altering the source code. And in simple words, if I just write a equals to, so let's say I need to get some integer value, and if I just write input, enter the value. So this is soft coding because every time I run the code, value of a can be changed easily, right? So I can give a 5 this time. Next time when you run the code, same, you will get the same message, enter the value, and then you can enter maybe some other value, right? So this is soft coding, very simple example. Hard coding is if I give some constant value. So if I write a equals to 9, now it can be really hard to change it, right? So it's like we are embedding specific values and configurations directly into the source code and we can't change it. So that's hard coding. Now let's try to understand when to use soft code and when to use hard code. And the examples that I gave, they actually illustrate the concept in a very simple manner, but sometimes it can be really hard to understand where to soft code, where to hard code. And I'll give you certain examples where you will doubt if it's actually soft code or hard code. Okay. And I want you to just uh, pay attention to whatever I say. And if you don't understand, feel free to ask in the comments. Okay. So uh, let's first talk about soft coding. When to soft code? When can you soft code? The very first thing that comes to mind is configuration settings, right? When you're working with configuration settings, for example, if you have to, set a file path, right? Or maybe you are working with database connection strings, or you are working with API endpoints, it is always wise to soft code, right? If you are working with any of these, use soft coding. Why? Because if you are using soft coding, you can have quick adjustments. You will not have to change the source code for those adjustments. Okay. For example, let's say I need to have a configurable API endpoint, right? So it is configurable means I'll need to change the configurations in the future, right? So that means I need to use soft coding. So I can just write endpoint equals to, and then here I can give some URL v1 or something, right? So don't worry about the URL as for now. Just remember that this is an example of soft coding. Okay. Let me give you a very simple example. Another example, one more, where we are trying to work with user input validation. Right? So if you have a code where you need to work with user input validation, you need to soft code your input validation rules along with error messages and other user facing content. This will make it easier to update them without altering the core logic of your program. So for example, let's say there is user input validation. I'm gonna have a variable min length equals to 8, and then I'm gonna maybe print some error message that says password should be uh, at least 8 character long, right? This is also an example of soft coding. Let me tell you how. See, soft coding refers to the practice of defining values or parameters that can change in the future, right? So you don't have to work with them like hard coding where you have to directly, pin them into the code. In this example, in this specific example, we are using soft coding for both minimum password length and error message. Okay, how? When I say minimum length equals to 8, by assigning the value 8 to the variable min underscore length, I'm making it easier to change the minimum length password in the future. So anybody can change the length of this password in the future. They don't have to modify the code, right? So without modifying the code, no matter where it is used, they can change the minimum password length. This allows for flexibility in adjusting the requirements without changing the code structure. Okay, that's why it is soft coding. Speaking of error message, by storing the error message, password should be at least 8 characters. By storing this message in the variable error message, I'm allowing you to change the error message text if needed without having to search for and replace every occurrence of this message in your code. Okay, so this makes it more maintainable, readable, and soft coded. Now, let me give you a counter example of hard coding. So, if I say if length of password is less than 8, print length should be at least 8 characters or something. So, this is an example of hard coding. Why? The minimum length requirement is 8 and the error message is directly embedded in the code. So this makes it less flexible and it is also very hard to maintain. If you look at the previous example, this one, soft coding, it is a good practice because it makes code more adaptable and maintainable. But in this case, it is not maintainable, it is not adaptable because error message is directly embedded in the code, right? In this case, we are just using a variable, but in this case, I'm not assigning this error message to a variable, which makes it hard coded. It's not soft coded because I can't, in this case, because the error message is assigned to a variable, right? I can easily change this error message and I can change the value of this variable. But in this case, I'm just embedding it into the code. I'm not assigning it to a variable, right? Which makes it really hard to maintain or make it flexible. Another example I can give you pertaining to soft coding is scalability. Soft coding is very important when you are building applications that need to scale, right? Sometimes you will work with projects where you need to scale the number of users, right? You need to scale the project somehow. If you're using soft coding, you can easily scale, you can easily adapt the project to changing requirements without having to rewrite the sections of code. Again, if I have to give you an example, let's say you're working with certain users, I can just use a variable max users equals to 1000, right? This is again example of soft coding. Why? Because max users is a variable and it is used to represent the maximum number of users. And the main focus of this instance of soft coding is scalability. Okay. If I assign 1000 to the variable to this variable max users, I make the code more readable and maintainable. If the maximum number of users need to be changed in the future, I can update the value of max users, max underscore users, in one place only. I don't have to change the value everywhere, right? I'll just change the value of max underscore users and it will automatically show its impact or it will, propagate throughout the code wherever it is used. Fine. Then, since we are talking about scalability, uh, when I'm using, soft coding, and I'm soft coding the maximum number of users, it is also allowing me to easily adapt the system to handle a larger number of users in the future. If my application grows and I need to support more users, I can increase the value of max underscore users. I don't have to alter the code structure, right? And another concept that relates to that is pretty much, that resonates with soft coding is parameterization, right? If I am soft coding these parameters, like the variables and all that, it is very important practice for building scalable software. It allows me to fine tune software or system parameters without having to rewrite the logic of the code, because when we talk about projects, usually we take them as parameters, right? So again, if I have to use the same statement for hard coding, I could just write if max underscore users is more than 1000, and then I can write some code that if it is if max users are more than 1000, do this. And this is hard coding, and it will make the code more challenging. It will make it uh, difficult or challenging to scale the system in the future, if there is need to scale it. With soft coding, you can easily adjust system parameters to accommodate growth without needing to change the code's basic logic, which makes it more adaptable and scalable, right? So keep in mind this also, right? Hard coding and soft coding. I mean, sometimes I've seen students, just look at the statement. Okay, I've assigned a value to a variable, so that makes it uh, hard coding. It's not like that. Yes, when I'm using input statement, it's very clear that I'm using soft coding, but even these statements make difference. You have to understand where it is actually being hard coded and where it is actually being soft coded. So I hope now you understand where you can use soft coding, specifically when you are trying to scale, uh, when you're working with configuration settings, or when you are working with projects where you need to validate user input. Okay, now let's see when to hard code. Okay, hard coding means you are embedding the value into the code, which also means maybe you can't change it in the future. And if you can't change the value, you can't say that I'm working with variables, right? Because values that never change are called constants. So hard coding is used when you're working with constants. Constants, again, their values never change, and there are many mathematical values. Uh, pi is one of the value, right? Taken as constant. So it can be hard coded for clarity and simplicity. So for example, if I say 3.141, whatever the value of pi is, working with constants, right? We make use of hard coding when we are working with constants. And another example is working with internal system components. Now, I'm not talking about configurations, I'm talking about internal system components. I'm talking about internal system components. When we are working with these components, and because these are tightly coupled and they are unlikely to change. Configurations usually change, but these type of components, they are unlikely to change. So we should use hard coding, right? But it's also important to document them very clearly to make their maintenance easier, right? Documentation means just add some comments or something. So, speaking of hard coding, example I can give you is, let's say you're working with some database connection statement, and let's say this is the statement: user colon password uh, at the rate, maybe local host. That's how usually we write, right? So this statement is also an example of hard coding, right? How is it an example of hard coding? Let me tell you how. When we talk about hard coding in programming, it means that we are embedding specific and unchanging values directly into the code instead of making them configurable or dynamic like we did in configuration settings. In this example, the line of code I'm providing you with is hard coding the database connection string. Okay, and why it is considered hard coding? For a lot of reasons. Number one, there are certain specific values. The database connection string includes specific details like there is username, password, host, and database name. These values are directly embedded into the code, right? There is also lack of flexibility. If I change the database or its credentials, it would also require modifying the code itself, right? Because certain things related with that database will change, so I'll have to change the code. This makes it inflexible and potentially error prone, specifically if we are dealing with larger applications where there are multiple components depending on this specific connection string, right? And that's why it is often better to make such configuration values external or at least easily changeable without modifying the code. This will allow you to adapt your application to different environments. uh, Maybe you want to work in a development or testing or production environment, or sometimes you want to update connection details without touching the actual code base, which again improves security and maintainability. So specifically a hard coded example. One of the students told me that maybe someone told them that this is hard coding. Uh, yeah, per se, it's not really hard coding because there are a lot of reasons for that actually. In hard coding, we typically refer to the practice of again embedding, specific values or unchanging values into the code. But in this case, two is not unchanging. I understand that. But uh, it's a dynamic value derived from the loop variable I. Okay, so hard coding would involve using a constant value directly in the code. Like if I say result equals to 2, right? So that's why this is not per se hard coded value. And so I hope now you got an idea when to use soft coding, when to use hard coding, and how to discern where hard coding is being used and where soft coding is being used. Now, let me give you a few tips or best practices how you can utilize hard coding or soft coding in your code. Whenever you are coding, whether it is hard coding or soft coding, always try to use descriptive variable names. I think I've covered this in previous in one of the videos about soft coding and hard coding. But let me share it one more time. So always try to use descriptive variable names. Descriptive variable names means they are more readable. So instead of writing mu, I'm writing max users. So at least user will know what I'm talking about. Whoever is reading the code, they will know what I'm talking about. And then try to document it. Documentation means try to provide some comments or something. So whenever you are giving a variable or something, try to provide some comment or something about the variable. What is it? So for example, this is a constant or something, right? So that the other person can understand the reasoning behind your choices, why you used a equals to 9 or something. Another point that I have seen many students forget is to test your code, right? And for that you can use many version control systems like there are many version control systems out there like git is one of those. It can help you track changes, and it will also help you understand that even if like your code is hard coded, you can always go back to a previous state. Okay, and in conclusion, choosing between soft coding and hard coding is not a one size fits all decision. It depends on the specific situation, specific person, programmer, because we all program differently, and your project's requirements. So just try to follow best practices and consider the examples we've covered to, discern if it is soft coding or hard coding. Okay. If you have any doubt, you can always ask in the comments or you can send me an email. Thank you for tuning in to today's video lecture. If you found it helpful, don't forget to give it a thumbs up, share it with your fellow developers, your fellow classmates, your friends, and subscribe for more such videos. And again, if you have any questions or topics you'd like me to cover in the future videos, leave them in the comments or send me an email. This topic specifically, I had already created a video lecture on soft coding and hard coding, but all these examples were sent by specific students, certain students, and I just wanted to, let you all understand the concept of hard coding and soft coding, and how to discern and when to use which when to use hard coding or soft coding. So I hope this is helpful, and I'll see you next time. Till then, take care.